And we're back. Hello and welcome to You and I for the Kenai. I'm here as always with Eric and Coburn. And today we have another special guest. Lauren, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Dandy. Thank you. Yeah. If you don't mind, I'll start just with a quick synopsis of your childhood.
All right. The earliest I can really remember or recall is I was about 4 or 5 years old. I lived in North Pole with my dad in a 6,200 square foot home.
That's huge.
With more than 20 foster brothers that were coming in and out of the home at a time.
Wow. That's a
very unique situation.
Yeah. Wow.
My dad was a single parent, so he wasn't able to foster any girls. So I was the only girl surrounded by a lot of adolescent boys. Not a very good combination for a young girl.
No.
My dad always took in the misfits, the ones that had problems going in and out of jail, running from the law, had a lot of drug or alcohol issues. So I was surrounded by a lot of chaos in my childhood. I ended up getting taken away by the state when I was 6.5 for child endangerment and being sodomized. My neighbor was, he was peeping Tomming from across the road with a microscope and saw what was going on in the house and called OCS. So I was taken by the state. I was transferred through foster home to foster home for like 11 and a half months. At that point in time, the state would not let me have any contact with any family. My grandparents had no idea of my whereabouts. Anytime my family found my whereabouts, the state would relocate me. It wasn't until one day that I was placed with this one foster family, this elder Native woman. She had like 9 biological children, all boys, and she was just one of those foster parents that was in it for the money. She gave me a little hammock in front of her broken living room window in the winter. Didn't help me with any of my homework. Only her oldest son did. And her oldest son actually put a sleeping aid in her drink one night. And she passed out at the kitchen table. She'd always lock up her stuff, her purse, her cell phone, all that stuff, even the house phone in her room with a deadbolt on the door. So she passed out at the table. I grabbed the phone, called my grandparents. My grandpa came, kicked the door in the next day. And I lived in my grandparents' basement for the next 3 years.
And were you kind of like in hiding from the state at this point?
Yeah.
Okay.
For about 1.5 years, I was in hiding. And then my grandma, she was homeschooling me, fighting the state. It wasn't until, like, my grandma and grandpa, they literally liquidated all their assets. They made it new, sold it off piece by piece, renovated their entire house, all their properties, their boats, their cars, everything, to try and get me back out of state's grasp. And when they finally won custody of me, my grandparents sold their house, sold everything, and moved to Ninilchik down here by the time I was 10. So I lived with my grandparents. We lived in a fifth wheel here, like 5 miles from Ninilchik. They started building a house, and my grandparents would send me to and from school. They lived across the street from the man that was my grandpa's best man lived right across the street from them. So he had a vehicle and was able to take me to and from. So he helped me and my grandparents quite a bit. And pretty much lived with my grandparents for a while. My dad was not allowed to have contact with me for the first couple years. The state told him that he had to relinquish his foster care license at that point in time if he wanted to ever have contact again. So my dad gave that up, came down one summer for fishing, and the big house in North Pole caught on fire, burnt down. My uncles, they were always in and out of jails, dating prostitutes, smoking crack, or very abusive, ran away from their relationships, left their kids and stuff like that. So my grandma and grandpa would take them in under their roof. Basically, they'd live off grandma and grandpa for a long time. And I started school in Anilchik for a long time. It wasn't until about the 6th grade when I really started getting introduced to alcohol. I was babysitting for a friend. Her cousins, she was moving out of state, and she was babysitting her cousins' kids while they worked. When she moved out of state, I took over, and it was her cousin's husband that started sexually assaulting me when I would get drunk or passed out. And that's when I really started to drink that much harder.
So you're in the 6th grade at this time?
Yeah.
Dang.
So I started a really big drinking career back in the 6th grade. It wasn't until about the 8th grade I was introduced to pot. A friend introduced me to pot to try and slow down on my drinking because I was drinking up to 2/5 a day.
Wow.
And so she would just get me completely stoned, and to where I would just either become comatose or just pass out. So I wouldn't drink. And that kind of took over from there. After, there was one night where I went home and I was drinking with my brother. I got so drunk, I told him what happened, or what had been happening for the last couple years, because these girls that I was babysitting were like 2, 3, and 5, I think, and it would have been really devastating for anything like that to happen to those girls.
Yeah. And because their dad or stepdad, whatever, would he would intentionally get you drunk in order to do sexual things?
Later on down the road, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I started smoking pot more often, so I wasn't drinking as much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went home, told my brother. My brother went to my dad, told my dad, and then one day my dad just like was pissed off, came up to me and was like, "Hey, we're leaving, we're going into town," and he wouldn't tell me why. We just all loaded up in the truck, and then next thing I know, we're pulling into the trooper station, and I'm like being forced to tell my story.
Wow.
To the state troopers, and they didn't believe me until quite a few years later, till I was like 13, when 4 other people came forward about his actions, and sadly to say, all 3 of his daughters and his sister were the ones to come forward. So,
I mean, that had to have been devastating. I mean, you go in and you have to tell something that's just like extremely vulnerable.
Yeah.
And you're said, "Sorry, don't really believe you."
Yeah.
Wow. And sadly, that's not an uncommon thing, I don't think.
No.
Just for women to not
actually,
be
it's
believed.
not.
I mean, it's fairly common, I think.
Yep.
And I think that's really tragic.
Yeah, it was a little hard to take when I was 13 years old. Wasn't really a whole lot I could do about it. After that moment in time, I started drinking again, kind of put down the pot, and I didn't really care to be at home very much. There were these particular foster boys that my dad always would just stay in contact with, and one of them was a bad apple out of the bunch. The rest were completely fine. They were just like my older brothers, except that just one bad apple just always wanted to mess with me, whether I was sleeping in bed or playing nice, or yeah, I don't know. So my dad just, I don't know, for whatever reason, really loved these particular foster boys, loved taking care of them more so as his children than myself. Me being the only girl growing up, I told my dad I deserved to have the master bedroom in the house. Being the only female, I deserved to have my own bathroom. I'm not going to clean up after all these boys. So I moved back in with my dad when he was finishing his house in Anilchik, right across the street from my grandparents. So, of course, my dad gives me the master bedroom. He starts moving in foster boys again. At that point in time, he's not fostering because he gave that up, but he still stayed in contact with those particular ones.
Yeah, kind of same
Might as
thing.
well be,
Right,
yeah.
right.
So at that point in time, I was meeting a bunch of I don't know, older, much older, people that love to throw parties and stuff. I started hanging out with my next door neighbors that I got a puppy from when I was like 9. They always drank, partied, smoked pot. I was over there constantly. I was more interested in not being at home, but they were more interested in not getting caught with me at their home. Partying. So, they taught me how to drink so I could go out to parties and not be taken advantage of. And so I started partying a lot at that point in time. And one night we went back to their house and some random dude comes out. They had this little itty bitty like shack that had a little twin bed, a little kitchen and everything, just built for like one person. So they would let me sleep in that while they stayed in their big house. Well, this dude comes over and he's just completely smashed. He comes into the little cabin, crawls up to the little loft bed, starts taking his clothes off, and he's in his, what are those? Those red pajamas, like thermals, like with a
Long
butt
johns or
flap.
whatever?
Yeah. I was like, are you serious? What are you doing? So I just like turned sideways in the bed, give him both feet right off the edge. And he falls and he gets back up, and this is actually the dude that ended up introducing me to crystal meth, like about 9 months later. So I started doing crystal meth, partying, and all that. And one thing that intrigued me with the meth was I didn't have to go to sleep. So it was like I could go home, not worry about going to sleep, being taken advantage of. There was just like an end to that terror.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent a lot of time being high or drunk, just completely out of my reality.
Mm-hmm.
So the times that I did spend home, I just spent usually pretty messed up. Other times I would just stay out at friends' houses as often as I could. In between school, I'd bring big coffee cups to school filled half with booze. I'd get in trouble for pot on school grounds. There were a couple times where I literally walked out of the school because I was so high, frustrated, and couldn't get my next drink. Didn't have time in between classes and didn't want to do what a teacher told me, so I just walk out. Another thing that happened when I was about 13, 14 years old, my grandparents took me to school, and my dad was trying to finish the house, the outside of it, putting on siding in the middle of winter. And I woke up that morning with a bad feeling, like something terrible was going to happen. So I did everything I possibly could, hold the thermometer up to a light, jump up and down, get all sweaty, just look absolutely my worst, and it did not work. My grandparents still dragged me to school. By lunchtime, I kept trying to call the house. Nobody was answering the house phone, and as soon as the bell rang and class started, I'm in class, and the principal calls me over the intercom saying that there's an emergency and I need to grab my things and leave the school immediately. So I go downstairs to the office, and my grandma's out there crying, and she's like, your dad's been in a terrible accident. You need to grab your things, and we need to go right now. Your dad's being medevaced to Anchorage. So my grandma only had like this little itty bitty white 2-door truck, and she's too old to drive, starting to go blind. So she has her youngest son, my uncle, driving. So I climb into the bed of the truck with my school gear, and I'm just laying down.
Middle of winter.
In the middle of winter, and they haul us all the way up to Soldotna. And we make it to the hospital, and I get to see Dad for maybe like 2 seconds as they're rushing him from the ER to the helicopter. And that's like the last time I saw him for 3 weeks. At that point in time, my dad was having more windows shipped to the house, and they were getting ready to be installed. So it wasn't completely enclosed yet. And I had my brother, my middle oldest brother, living there with me, and he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy when he was born. He got stuck, so like his arm and his leg were ripped out of socket at birth. So he had a lot of physical and mental disabilities. He was diagnosed to have a mentality of a 13-year-old for the rest of his life. So I'm 13 and I'm at home with my brother who's mentally and physically disabled, can't take care of himself, lives on SSI, and my dad is in a coma up in Anchorage for 4.5 months. My grandparents are living across the way, and it wasn't until like the first 2 weeks with my dad being gone in a coma were complete hell. My grandma, she was, I don't know what her problem was, but she was doing everything in her power to try to like take and liquidate all of my dad's assets. Everything. Gain control of me and then just make as much money off the situation as she could. And I got pretty pissed off and tired of it, so I hitched a ride into town with one of my meth buddies and went to the courthouse, and I started filing paperwork. And me being a minor, I went in front of a judge of sound mind and asked for power of attorney over my dad's finances and legalities until he was better, and I was able to prove that my grandma was being old and senile in age and cannot take care of any of these things, especially not my brother, since my brother solely relied on my father for being taken care of. So I was warded that, and so I used my dad's finances to finish getting the house fixed and prepared for the final set-in of winter. Took care of my brother, made breakfast, lunch, dinner, around the clock, went to school, came home from school, did the same thing. My brother was a severe alcoholic. He hated his life and his disabilities, so he was just a really big alcoholic. And so about 4.5 months later, my dad...
I know you said your brother has the mentality of a 13-year-old, but how old is he at this point?
He was 10 years older than me at that time, so he was about 24.
Wow.
He passed away at 28.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. He ended up having a grand mal seizure. So he went to jail for drinking and driving on his four-wheeler. Went to jail for 3 years here at Wildwood. I went and picked him up, and he died 13 months later in his bedroom, had a seizure, and tripped over the cat and food dish, because I got him a cat because he had some severe PTSD from being in jail, had some major depression issues, so I got him a cat to take care of, make him feel better about himself, give him something to do, something constructive. And he tripped over the cat and food dish trying to feed the cat, and during his seizure, his neck caught on the footboard of the bed and crushed his larynx. And that morning, I stayed up all night that night tweaking in my bedroom, and I tried seeing if he wanted to smoke a bowl of weed with me before going to bed. And all night long, just the same song kept playing over and over and over and over again, really loud. And I figured maybe he just passed out drunk or something, but he had sworn off alcohol the day he got out of jail. He kept saying he's a different person, he doesn't want to go that route again, he wants to be sober and just be with family. So I figured maybe he had a relapse, and not once did I go and check on him.
How old are you at this point now?
Like 18, right?
16, 17,
18.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because he was 28.
Yep.
So you were 18.
And, gosh, at that point in time, I had a son in that time while he was in jail. And, gosh, my son must have been like 9, 10 months old or something when I found Teddy dead in his room. The very next morning, I was supposed to pick him up or get him ready. I went downstairs to make breakfast and everything, and my dad was like, hey, go upstairs, get your brother ready. You guys got to go, because I was going to take him to see his PO, his first meeting after jail. And I go to the bedroom, and I open the door, and I find him dead in there. Turned out that he had been in there for about 9 hours. And so after that just like completely freaked me out. Somehow like the whole attitude and everything of the house just kind of changed, like the whole aura of it. Like the house just didn't seem warm and welcoming to me anymore. I called some relatives in Fairbanks and told them what had happened and told them I needed to get out of there. I couldn't sleep in that house. I was too afraid to fall asleep. So I'd call my next door neighbor's grandson to come over and sit up and stay with me and just watch me till I fall asleep, and he'd go home. Well, finally, one of my relatives 3 days later bought me a plane ticket to go to Fairbanks, and I brought my son with me, and I stayed there for about 3 weeks. I planned on moving there, so they bought me a plane ticket to come back here, and I ended up not going back. Ended up getting caught up in the party crowd.
In Fairbanks?
When I came back here.
Oh, okay.
I spent most of my time, I ended up going back to Fairbanks like 3 months later to throw my brother's funeral. So my dad didn't really care to set up anything for my brother or his funeral or anything like that. So I ended up going and getting a job, saving up money to help pay for the cremation and everything. I ended up coming up short.
And are you using through all this?
Yes.
Yeah, meth still mostly?
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm drinking, I'm methed out, and I'm selling on the side on top of working, saving up money, and my dad ended up stealing some of the money to pay for whatever the foster boys wanted at that point in time. I was really upset, so I packed up my stuff, my son's belongings, moved out to a friend's house, started saving up money again, filed with the state for compensation of having my brother's funeral expenses paid for. The state granted it, and the only thing I had to pay for was a place where I wanted it done. I had to pick the crematory and save up the gas to travel all the way to Anchorage, pick up his ashes, and then go to Fairbanks from there. So I was in Fairbanks for about 1 week. Took me 7 days. My brother, he loved race car driving. So he was always in a stock car pit when I was younger. So there's this federation called the GFRA. It's the Greater Racing Association of Fairbanks. They have a big, huge racetrack there called Mitchelson Raceway. And my brother used to do stock car there before he was diagnosed with grand mal seizures and was sent to being only in the stock pit, helping change tires, fuel up, and all that. So knowing that that was one of my brother's favorite things in the world, he'd always make like plastic classic car models and stuff, you know, little art projects here and there. So I spent a week being underage bar hopping, looking for the people known to be the presidents of the GFRA in Fairbanks. And out of all the bars, the very last one I stopped at, I happened to find them. And I asked them if they would be willing to open up and reserve the raceway for my brother's funeral. And they said, yeah. I offered them a lump sum of cash to make this possible, and they said that they remembered my brother. He was really good in their crew, and that they would just do it for free of service. The only thing that they ask is I give them some kind of recognition, you know, let the world know what's happening. So I had it printed in the newspapers that we were going to be throwing my brother's service at the raceway. And when we held it, I got to drop his ashes all around the racetrack, all the family members in our entire family got to sit on the bleachers, smoke pot, drink beer, whatever, and everybody who had a vehicle that wanted to race was able to go on the racetrack. And we did 38 laps in honor of his birthday and all that. After the funeral, I got a phone call from my mom. This was probably the very last phone call I got from her, being of sound mind, since she was diagnosed with cancer. Pleased my mom to know that, I kind of jumped on the role of taking care of my brother's remains and all that. So after my brother's funeral, I stayed in Fairbanks for about another week, went and stayed with a foster sister of mine. We kind of partied a little bit, got to hang out, haven't seen each other in a long time. And her husband bought me a plane ticket back to Ninilchik, where I ended up staying. I was supposed to move back to Fairbanks and ended up not going back.
That's the second time this has happened, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So do you keep thinking, like, I'm going to go to Fairbanks and, like, kind of have a better life there? Or, I guess when you're thinking you're going to go to Fairbanks, is, like, sobriety, is that part of the thing? Or is just, like, a better life in general?
Better life in general.
Okay.
Sobriety
So you're not thinking about getting sober? You're just thinking about kind of a better...
Sobriety wasn't on my mind yet.
Okay. All right.
So I came back to Ninilchik, kind of went on a party rampage. I always left my son with my dad. Like, and the way I justified it was, I never get out of the house. I'm always home during the weekdays, so I deserve a weekend. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Being a single mom, not having any help, so I kind of pulled that card on my dad all the time.
Yeah, and it's probably, I'm not 100% sure, but I bet it's easier to justify, like, oh, kid loves grandpa, versus, like, I'm going to leave him at this babysitter for 2 days. It's like, oh, he's with his grandparents. He loves his grandparents.
Yeah.
I would think that would be a little bit easier to justify.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Leaving him with somebody that Zeke knows was a lot easier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd take off for the weekend. I'd go get messed up and come back. Usually the day after I start to come down, I just pass out at a friend's, wake up, go home. I did that off and on for probably about 8-9 months. And then I met a guy.
Were there times where you would go to party for a couple days and you would party for 4 or 5 days? Or was it always just go hard weekend for a day or two and then come home?
Go hard for a day or two and then go home.
Okay.
I'd always cut myself off on the third day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a messed up way of justifying it. So I met this guy 8-9 months after my brother died at a buddy's house. And me and his wife had our kids over the years, so our kids were growing up together. We'd always throw bonfires and have barbecues and stuff. Well, I met one of the dudes that he went to school with, and I ended up dating him for a while. Dated him for a few years. We actually moved into town, got an apartment, and helped him get a slope job through my uncle, and we started doing really good.
And were you guys both using pretty often?
Not in the beginning.
Okay. Drinking
was pretty usual in the beginning, and then about a year into our relationship, we started using meth pretty heavy, so we both started parenting behind the doors at that point.
What kind of changed? What was it? I guess, was it a sudden thing where you're like, hey, we should go do this, and then you both are like, yeah, that sounds great, or was it just a temptation, or did you know somebody, or how did it...
When we first met, we were kind of using... I don't want to say socially, but it was just the situation we were in.
Yeah.
Right.
Drinking became a habit. Mm-hmm. How we met was he was drinking Jack Daniels and everybody else was drinking beer, and I didn't drink beer. And he happened to be drinking Jack Daniels, and that's what I wanted. So I told him he should share his whiskey with me, and he said that I would, my lips would kiss the ground if he shared his whiskey with me, and I told him to put his money where his mouth was. So we went to the liquor store, bought 4/5 of JD. 2 were his, 2 were mine, and neither one of us could drink each other under the table. We drink each other sober, pretty much.
Wow.
So that's kind of how we met, and yeah, so drinking was kind of a natural thing then. I drank pretty heavily at that point in time, and once in a while we'd go out with friends and they'd be smoking some meth. We'd join in here and there. We'd leave, his ex-wife would have the kids, like, I don't know, throughout the week, during school week, my son would stay at my dad's for the weekend, and then he'd come home during the school week and all that. So, I don't know, at some point it just started to progress. We started doing it more and more. We ran into another buddy that they all went to school with who happened to cook meth, and then it started to become a regular thing.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
So,
because I would imagine, unless you have a pretty good connection, I mean, maintaining a heavy meth habit is expensive.
oh yeah,
Especially when you're still taking care of your kid.
yeah. Well, when we first met, he was working overseas.
Okay.
So he'd literally fly out and go to India and do, what's it called? He'd do like excavation in the ocean.
Oh, wow.
So he was an ocean excavator where they would basically drill holes into the earth to try and find oil.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then they drop down lines with miniature bombs on it to blow the seabed.
Wow.
And he was the navigator. So he was one of the top crewmen. He'd be gone for like 3-4 months at a time. When he'd come home, he'd have like $40,000-$60,000 in his bank.
Right.
So,
Going on.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So he'd come home, we'd party hard. He added me onto his bank account, and then I decided I wanted my own
trust.
Yeah, I
Dang.
wanted my own bank account. I got my own job, so I was working. He just helped set up the apartment, get those initial bills paid, and then I'd work while he was gone, and the kids would go to school. So it became pretty routine for a minute. Whenever he was gone, I'd sober up and work and do all the things I'm supposed to do at home. He'd come home, and then it was pretty much a party on, Garth.
Yeah.
So we would have huge flings. Like, we would have a bunch of friends come over. They would spend the night. I'd cook dinner routinely. It was really stupid because, like, most of the people there wouldn't even eat.
Yeah, no, exactly. I was about to say, like,
so
okay, cool.
we
We got all this food, but none of us are trying to eat for a couple days, so I guess I'll just Tupperware this up.
Yep, pretty much. So we'd have, like, lots of cooked food, really good food, so we just end up we gave a lot of it to our, our dealer that would have a bunch of people that just, like, would pass out or just run down themselves,
Yeah.
on his property.
Yeah.
And they would just, like, eat away,
You're right.
know. So...
Because coming off a good binge, I mean, you might sleep for, 12, 15, 20 hours and then eat thousands of calories, right?
Yeah, pretty much. You'll binge eat just as much as you binge sleep when you first come off a runner.
Sure.
So... yeah, we did that for almost 2 years, and then, I don't know, out of the blue, he met this girl. God, she must have been like 16. I was 21, 22 at this time. And he met this 16-year-old that he used to babysit when she was little. And so he started, I found out one time that he came home from work early, didn't tell me. We found out I was pregnant, so he decided to keep me home, get me all messed up, and then I was, like, at this point, I didn't, like, want to use, but that no was, like, not really an option, so he didn't want a baby. He didn't want another one. He didn't have anything to do with, one of his other kids down in the States, so I found out he came home early and spent the whole weekend with her before coming home to me. So he stays with me for about 5 days. He kept taking off routinely, like, oh, I got to go do this, and just wouldn't come home for, like, a long time.
Sure. And that was pretty new, right? I mean,
just out of the blue. So I guess he started having, like, this long-distance relationship over the computer with this 16-year-old, and mind you, he's, like, almost 30. So I was like, okay, well, so he comes home. He's getting ready to go back up on the slope. Well, he spent 3 days before leaving to go back to work packing up all his stuff. Takes it all to his dad's house. And he's just saying, well, I just want to keep it there, and our lease is getting ready to come up.
Sure.
So I'm like, okay, well, so he left me to pack up his kids' stuff, my son's stuff, my stuff, and move it. Like, give all his daughter's stuff back to his ex-wife, and then me move all of my stuff and my son's stuff back to Ninelchik at my dad's. So I do that, and tax returns are about to come up, so...
And you didn't want to renew your lease?
No, mm-mm.
You guys weren't?
There was just no point in getting the lease if he wasn't going to be there, too. The house was just too big for me and my son.
Sure.
So I was like, okay. So I defaulted on the lease, and from the very beginning, I didn't know what kind of person he was going to be, so I told him, do not put my name on that lease whatsoever. It's all going to fall on you, you know?
Yeah.
And it did. So we defaulted on the lease. He ended up having to pay $30,000 out of pocket for the rest of it.
It's a long lease.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, like a few months before that happened, the apartment complex ended up getting new managers or new buyers, I guess.
Yeah.
And so they were transferring the escrow account to new owners of the whole property. And so when that happened, they had to like renew the lease, everybody's lease in all these apartments for under new management. So we were already there for like 6 months. They didn't want to renew a 6 month. They're supposed to be a year plus. So they did a 9 month. And we were only there for like another 30 days at that point. And we didn't want to renew it for 9 months, but he had already signed the paperwork before he left.
Yeah.
So, and at this point, I already knew what was going on. So I went ahead and checked our mailbox routinely. He got his beautiful tax return. Beautiful thing about it, he was up on the slope, you know, kind of f***ing our family off. So I mailed his $60,000 tax return back to the state.
Dang.
Yeah, so when he came home from work, he couldn't get his own place. He couldn't do nothing. I was just like,
yikes, man.
Bro.
Dude.
So I went back home to my dad's house, and he tried getting a hold of me, all pissed off. I was like, well, I can introduce you to a buddy you can move in with. So he moved in over there. He wanted us to get a place again, and I was like, no, I'm not going to get a place with you again. Like,
did he know that you were the one that mailed a $60,000 check to the...
I told him.
And he was still like, oh, well, it's cool. We'll get a place.
Nope. Oh, he was really pissed off at me. The reason why I did that was, okay, so the day he left for the slope... And
I'm just sitting over here thinking, like, dude, like, okay, yeah, that's terrible that he did that. And I'm not saying that that's cool at all. I'm just trying to think of being in that position of, like, somebody being like, hey, man, you know that check you had? Yeah, I mailed it back.
Yeah.
So, sorry about that.
Well, it's not like I could have, honestly, I could have forged his signature on his account.
No, I thought that's what you were going to say. I'm like, dang, dude, she forged his signature,
I really could have just, like,
that would have been way
him.
harder, yeah.
But I decided that it'd be a lot harder for him to try and reclaim his money from the state than it would for me getting fraud.
Felony fraud, yeah.
So, well, the day he left for work, he dropped me off at the abortion clinic and stayed just long enough for them to start the whole procedure and then dipped out. So when I had to call my friends crying, like completely upset and I was high, I was scared, and he just left me there. Like, he's like, you're going to go through with this or we're not going to be together. And I was just like, are you f***ing kidding me? So he left for work, and I ended up going home to my friends come and pick me up, and I slept on their couch for 3 days after the abortion. And, like, I woke up on the couch, and I looked at my girlfriend, and I was like, I'll be back. I don't know when, but I'll be back. Like... So I left, and I partied hard for 3 days. Like, it was just nonstop. And then I showed back up at her place. She nursed me back to health, and then she drove me out to my dad's, and I stayed there. At that point, I ended up staying in bed because I started hurting really bad in my stomach. And I couldn't figure out what the was going on. So I went to the doctors, and they found that there were pieces of what would be like parts of the baby left in me. So I had to go to the hospital and re-get fixed.
Yeah.
So I had a really bad infection. So I was admitted into the hospital. Hospital called my ex from the slope, told him, you have to come home. Like, she can't leave here. She's really sick. You got to come back. So he got sent home. Like, he didn't want to leave work to come back and take care of me. But the hospital got a hold of his boss and told his boss, and his boss was like, oh, no, you're going to go home. Like, and my uncle was one of his bosses, so my uncle was like, nope, you're going home. He's like, yeah, and you're leaving without pay, so you're going to go home. And so they send him home with his first week's paycheck to help take care of me and whatnot. He comes back. He had me go and pick up his vehicle, or had his family drop his vehicle off at the hospital, made me drive to the airport to pick him up. And I'm like, on these medications, like hardcore cocktails from the hospital for the pain and all this, and he has me drive to the airport, pick his up. I get there, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm just going to lock the car, and I'm just going to be on the passenger side. I'm going to leave the car running, just knock on the window. He flies in, and he's, like, partially drunk from, like, the airports that he traveled through, and he decides to go to the upper deck bar at the airport in Kenai, and he starts drinking for like an hour. I wake up in the car, and I'm like, what the hell? I look at the time. I go in and I grab him, and it was just like on at that point. So I guess he must have gotten tired of arguing with me, because he went and found, so you know when they shut down Uptown Motel, this rundown motel in Kenai, they turned it into like a homeless shelter type deal. Right. You know, really cheap rooms, like you could pay $20 for a night or something like that. So he puts down like $60, puts me in a room where the thermostat's broken, I'm sick, and he takes off with my vehicle, leaves his vehicle because I have tags registration, and he just takes off, and I'm like, dude, if you don't come back, like, I'm going to report my vehicle stolen. So he comes back, and he took all my money. I had like a $300 paycheck. He goes and buys a bunch of meth with it, and comes back, picks me up, and I'm like, dude, just get your money back. Like, I'll drop you off at your dad's. You can do whatever you want, but I'm going to my dad's. So we end up stopping. He doesn't want to stay at his dad's. He decides he wants to stay at his friend's house where we met, which is like a mile or two from my dad's house. And I'm like, whatever. I'm like, fine, but you're driving. So we drive all the way out there. I drop his off, go to my dad's, and I don't know, it was really weird, but him and my buddy were having a conversation in the shop. I go in there, and my buddy actually, like, got really mean with me. Like, he was pissed off to high heaven with me for some reason. I imagine it probably had something to do with the abortion. Because about a week later, my buddy shows up on a four-wheeler at my dad's house, and he's drinking, he's sad, there's something wrong. He couldn't tell me what was going on. And I'm like, oh, well, we've been best friends for like 13 years, you know, me, his wife, his kids, my kids, like, so I'm like, okay, well, I'll just hang out with you, you know, there's something not right, your spirits are like hella down. Well, we end up going to the beach, and I'm like, well, let's just take a 5-gallon bucket. I was outside gardening in my dad's garden trying to rebuild his rock wall. We go to the beach, we start drinking a little bit of vodka, and he has another buddy show up down there, and I kept saying I wanted to go home. He wouldn't take me home. Well, his buddy that showed up had like a cooler in the back, and I was thirsty at this point. I didn't want to drink anymore. So he hands me a Pepsi, but I didn't really think anything of it, but it was open. And I took it, I drank it. I ended up waking up on the beach somewhere. Jeez. Missing my bra. My shirt was on, my pants were ripped, my shirt was torn, my hat, my gloves, my coat were gone, my boots were on, but they weren't tied. And I woke up because the ocean water was halfway up on me. And I woke up just in time to see my buddy on his four-wheeler taking off. So I get up and I'm just like, hey, don't forget about me. And he just like turns his head, slows down a little bit, but doesn't stop. And once he like really heard me scream, don't forget about me, he just like gunned it out of there. So, and I spent the next 13 hours on that beach trying to find a way off. I actually wound up almost freezing to death. I pulled my phone out. It was cracked, broken, wouldn't turn on. And somehow my dad and my foster brother found me on the beach. They said that my phone worked just long enough for me to scream. My son, being like 4 years old, answered the phone and heard me screaming for help. Like,
wow.
So my son was crying and took the phone, right. And I guess he beat my dad in the face with it. Like, wake up, Mama's in trouble. I don't recall any of this. I don't recall being on the phone. I don't remember any of it at all. This is just what my dad told me. So my dad and my foster brother, like, they spent hours driving up and down, like, every single beach entrance in Ninilchik trying to find me. And the real messed up part was I was less than 3 miles from home. So they found my buddy on the four-wheeler just driving drunk down the highway. And they run him off the highway, make him stop, and they're like, where the hell did you leave Lauren? Like, he wouldn't tell them. Like, he kept just trying to get away. So they called the cops, and he went to jail, and they found a tide book on him on his four-wheeler where it was highlighted for the highest tide of the year, and where he left me was between two coves where there's, like, no beach. Once the water comes in, you're just kind of f***ed. So I actually shattered my ankle in 3 places running on the beach in the dark. My foot fell through two plates of coal and just totally flipped my whole leg over. I got up and I was still running down the beach, and I wasn't sure if I was like seeing clearly. I probably ran for like 3-4 miles down the beach trying to find an exit, and I'm just like running my hand along the wall and just trying to run as fast as I can before the water gets up there. And like out of the farthest corner of my eyesight, I like saw something, and then I started hearing voices. Like, I didn't know what the hell, but I remember like screaming. I screamed so hard that I paralyzed my vocal cords. My throat was bleeding. Nobody could hear me over the ocean, really. So I saw my dad and my brother just like walking up towards me, and I thought it was just like, I didn't think anybody was really there. So I just like started running towards this image that was just appearing in the dark. And I heard my foster brother's voice, and I just collapsed in his arms. My dad walks up behind him, and he's disabled. So my dad couldn't really keep up. They found me. My dad was wearing his feather-down jacket. It was 13 degrees outside during that time. It was middle of November, late November. 13 degrees out, there was frost on the ground, not quite any snow anywhere, not on the beach anyways. So my dad took his coat off, covered me up, and I was about 300 feet from the exit that they came down. And the ambulance drove all the way up to the very top of the exit at the top of the bluff, and they had to walk a stretcher down. They kept trying to get me to stand up and walk, but I was too frozen. I couldn't move. They couldn't even pick me up normal. I was just like a flat board. So they carried me up. I don't remember any of it. I woke up in the ambulance about 10 minutes out of town with a bunch of kids that were training to be EMTs from Ninilchik. They were all naked and on top of me, and I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, there's a bunch of naked people on top of me in their underwear, and they're, like, really young. And I'm just like, where am I? Like, I started freaking out, just, like, trying to rip these straps off me. And they're just like, it's okay. Like, they explained, like, what happened, where I am. I had like major rashes all over me from the coal beds and stuff.
Were you hallucinating, or were there actually you're in the ambulance and there are people with just their underwear on?
Well, it's
Yeah.
the best way to warm up someone.
Mm-hmm.
With
And they're warming you
hypothermia.
up?
Body.
Yeah.
Wow.
The Ninilchik ambulance was not prepared for anybody with hypothermic symptoms whatsoever. They had no warming blankets. They had nothing other than IVs and stuff. Most of their protocols are based on, senior citizens having strokes or heart attacks and stuff.
Wow.
So they weren't prepared for a hypothermic individual such as myself. They checked.
And that's got to be terrifying.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because you probably, it sounds like you had just been drugged and sexually assaulted.
Yeah.
Right?
Like,
that's what happened.
I had no idea,
And
like,
now
what
you
happened.
wake up and...
I'm in an ambulance. I didn't even know I was in an
That sounds
ambulance, but
terrifying.
I'm just, like, freaking out,
Yeah.
and they tell me what happened.
Yeah. Wow.
And what they're doing. They checked my core temperature, and I was 93.4 degrees.
Ooh.
They said if I had another 10 minutes on that beach, I would have been dead.
Wow.
It wound up to be in the newspaper that next Sunday. My buddy ended up getting like 6 years. He actually was sentenced to come to treatment here, do half his jail time at Wildwood.
Did he get charged with, like, assault? Like sexual assault?
They wanted me to slap him with attempted manslaughter because of the Tide book.
Yeah.
The DA was pressing really hard, and I was just like, no, like, this guy has a very characteristic background. Like, I'm not out for blood. Like, that's going a little too far, you know? I was in no way going to go that route.
So do you think he wasn't trying to kill you?
Years down the road, he admitted to a future boyfriend of mine that was his intent, was just, nobody ever find me again. Not kill me himself, but just, you know.
Pretty much, though.
Yeah.
I mean, drug you,
honestly.
leave you in a place where there would soon be no land.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
So...
Wow.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
So...
Surreal.
Like... after all that, like... Yeah, it was pretty messed up. Like, me and my ex and my buddy, we quit talking at that point. Like, there was just...
Yeah.
That would make sense.
That's a friendship ender right there. Attempted murder.
So, we, the DA kept pushing me to want to press for attempted manslaughter. I wouldn't do it. I can't remember what the charge was that I went to, but he got 36 months added on to his sentence. He got 10 years of probation. Yeah. So, and his wife called me all the time, round the clock, like, harassing me, like, oh, it's your fault, like, you shouldn't have even been out there, like, this would have never happened, just totally losing her mind, like, she just lost her best friend, her drug dealer, her kid's dad, like, you know, things were just off the charts, so I had to call the troopers and put a restraining order on her. A lot of people in the community and friends, like, basically my whole life at that point kind of ended. I just quit going outside the house, quit hanging out with people. I just pretty much stayed home. I only had a very few select friends that would come over. It definitely changed my perception on who to trust.
Yeah, that's like the biggest betrayal. Like, that's, I mean,
Yeah.
you can't get... Wow.
Yeah.
So what's your use look like after this now? Your substance use look like right after this scenario? Because from my understanding, that guy was also your dealer as well as your friend, right? So, I mean, is...
One of them, yeah.
Okay, that was my question. One of your dealers. So, I mean, at this point, has this deterred you from using?
A little bit.
Experience?
I mean, there were a lot of our other friends that would deal that were just, like, totally suspicious of the situation. Everybody just got really suspicious of me at that point, you know? Like,
it's so...
Like,
it's so typical, like, in society, you know, especially in our society. Like, it's so sad that, like, a victim suffers some kind of, whether violence or sexual assault or sexual violent crime, is a victim of that, and then they bring it forward, and they're the ones that are ostracized, and they're the ones that are blamed, like, oh, you have brought so much, like, troubles to this church body. You've brought so much troubles to this family, to this community. If only you. Meanwhile, the victim's like, no, like, really, if only this person wouldn't have raped me for years, or if this person wouldn't have sexually assaulted me on a beach and then left me for dead, like, I'm not the one that did this. This happened to me.
Right.
Like, and they're like, oh, do you mind if, we still allow this person to be involved in this organization? Do you mind if we still allow this person to, like, be involved in this? And you're like, the victim's like, I shouldn't have to mind. Like, you should mind for me. You should mind that these violent crimes, these violent sexual crimes have been committed. But like, you shouldn't have to ask me.
Right. It's pretty typical
so typical
in the drug world. Like, if anybody is actually victimized and it's another person within the circle that's a part of it, that victimized someone else, it's the victim that is causing problems and everyone gets suspicious of entirely. Like, you end up getting black sheeped pretty much.
And that happens in, outside of the drug world. And, that happens in all over, like, in our culture, like, especially, like, in domestic violence or violence, like, against women or sexual assault. Like, the victims come forward, and it's like, they're the ones that are like, oh, I don't know, they could be making that up. Like, when really, like, it's very rare that women or men, make up, like, that they've been sexually assaulted. That's rare. But, like, people are like, oh, it's just a really sad, typical thing. It's really sad.
Well, and I think a part of it is that people don't want to believe that kind of stuff happens.
Right.
They hear about it. And
life's easier if it doesn't.
Well, and especially if they know the person, and to think that someone that they trusted could be capable of such an evil thing isn't something that they want to consider. It's easier to block out the cries of the people who desperately need help than to accept the fact that you trusted basically a monster. And as someone who can bring great harm to you or your family, and that's hard to accept.
It's like it's an insecurity almost, you know what I mean? Like, you bring it back on yourself, like, man, like, I trusted that person.
Yeah.
Like, I was friends with that. People put our names in the same sentence. Like, you don't want to, you don't want to think that you were capable of trusting somebody that was capable of such.
It definitely ran through my mind. Like, I had no way of talking to him. There was no contact order. I had a trespass and restraining order on his wife. Which really, really sucked because we were all best friends for like 13 years. Like, I didn't want to believe it. Yeah. I didn't want to believe that my buddy was capable. Like, I actually got into a huge fight with my brother and my dad over it. Like, why would you send him to jail? Like, he couldn't be capable of this. And they're like,
wow.
They're like, you don't know how you looked when we found you on the beach. You don't know what happened. Like, they found 5 times the legal limit of GHB in my system.
Oh, wow.
When I woke up in the hospital, I just, like, I ripped everything off except for the IV. Like, I was like, discharge me right now. Like, I was absolutely afraid of, I guess, the truth. Like, I didn't want to hear it. Like,
oh, yeah.
That's a hard truth.
I was like, I didn't want to know anything about what happened. I just wanted out. Discharge me now. Let me go.
Yeah, just forget.
Like, I don't want there to be any proof. Like, I was actually afraid of even standing up for myself if that situation was correct.
Wow.
There was no telling what would happen later on down the road. You know what I mean? So I'm just like, I didn't really know what to do with it. I just didn't want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So I spent months ignoring the DA. I just stayed at home, not really talking to anybody. I wouldn't even let the hospital, what is that, where they take a rough sponge and they just, like, go to town on your frickin' skin, taking all the rocks and, like, road rash when they just, like, scrub with, I wouldn't even let them do that. Like, I had them discharge me. So I went home, and my sister-in-law, my brother's wife, she drew a bath for me in my bedroom and climbed in the bathtub with me and just started scrubbing me down to get all that stuff out of my skin, all the coal and stuff. And then they put me to bed, and I was asleep for like 3 days, I think. Just slept for 3 days in my bed. Not feeling good, hurting. My brother's wife came in constantly to check on me and make sure I was still breathing. Shortly after that, when I recovered a little better, I guess it scared my foster brother and his wife enough to where they moved out of state. They're like, nope, we're done. Like, clean up or, something even worse is going to happen to you. So they packed up, they left. After they left, I started mainly smoking pot, drinking here and there. Spent a lot of time with my son. I'd party on the weekends sometimes. There was only like a few of my friends out of that big drug circle that, believed me and told everybody else to just f*** off. Like, you don't know what happened. Like, we believe that, this person's capable of this. Like, if he wasn't, look at the hard facts. He's in jail, and, like, there just wouldn't be any way to make anything like that up. So I had some friends that would come, I guess, cater to my need or whatever. Just try and change the situation for me a little bit. So it took me a long time to actually really leave the house. I was too afraid to leave the house for a long time. I just pretty much was a closet user for a year and a half at that point. Just stayed home. I finally got up enough courage to go get a job. So I started working in Anchor Point. I ended up dating a drug dealer about 9 months into working in Anchor Point, and we had a relationship for a while. We'd get clean and then stop. Get clean for a few months and then party for a few months. So is this
kind of one of the first times that you're like, I should probably clean up?
Yeah,
it sounds like before you weren't interested in it, and this is one of the first times that you're kind of like,
At this point, I was like, well, my son's getting old enough to understand. He knows what he sees,
Yeah.
So I was like, well, I got to clean up for, random amounts of time. I don't know how I really justified that. Like, hey, I'm clean for a few months, so I can go get messed up for a few months. So we did that for about 11 months. In between that 11 months dating him, I woke up to him shooting me up with heroin. Complete mind blower. I started freaking out and crying. I was like, you don't know, like, I heard stories of people just doing too much and just dying, and I was just like, are you serious? Like, why would you shoot me up with this shit? I told you I never wanted to do it, try it, nothing. People kept trying to warn me about him, like, you be careful, like, he's got the reputation of turning girls. Like, and I was like, no, like, no way, And then I wake up with him shooting me up with heroin in my arm. And I was like, are you kidding me? So at that point, it was like, we got into a huge fight over it, like, as well as I could, like, muster to him out while I'm really high. I ended up puking for, like, 3 hours straight. Like, it was the worst high ever. So he got me onto heroin, and I started using it here and there. I never wanted to, like, become normal using it, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to become my normalcy. So he would end up having to shoot me up because I was too afraid to shoot myself up with anything. My drug of choice was just meth and to smoke it for the longest time. And then it got to the point where my body was just like, it had to have it, like, or I was just sick without it, And it absolutely sucked because there were times where he'd find me crying and he's just like, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I can't I'm stuck here and I can't, like, my son is at home wondering where his mom is at. Like, this is that's on my mind constantly, and it's just eating me, you know? And he's just like, he'd be like, some days he'd have a heart and be like, okay, well, then let's clean up, and then that'd last for about a week, and then he'd want to, you know, go out and go on another runner, go speedball. And so after like 4 months of that, I got tired of it. We went up to Anchorage to work for some people.
You said go speedball?
Yeah.
That's super scary.
Yeah, shoot heroin and meth at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Because what that can do is that can create an irregular heartbeat. They call it Belushi as well. That's how John Belushi died, the actor.
Oh, really?
Because when you do an upper and a downer at the same time, it can create create an irregular heartbeat and a heart murmur, and like it can get going so fast.
Your heart will
on
explode.
one side. Yeah, literally just explode in your chest. Like,
wow.
It can actually kill you fairly easily.
Yep.
And his was just like cocaine, and I don't even think it was heroin. Like it was something else, like codeine or something weird.
Wow.
Yeah, or like pills maybe. Yeah, coke and like another opioid or Oxycontin or something like that.
Yep.
That's wild.
Oh, yeah. And so after 4 months of that, I found out I was pregnant again, so I started to clean up. And he started to clean up. Surprisingly, he put the heroin down, and he was clean for about 4 months. I was clean for about 4 months. I used to take care of his mom as a home PCA. Took care of all her medical and health issues, her diabetes and all that. And I used to get paid fairly well for it. His daughter went to Avtech to try and get a job like me, making $18.50, $25.50 an hour as an in-home nurse. And so I was like, okay, she graduates, I gave her my job. Well, I started partying with her dad a lot, and his daughter, out of the blue, just like blew my mind. She started partying and quit taking care of her grandma. So I slowed down on my drug use to take care of his mom without pay again, just routinely. Yeah, we ended up, like, we weren't together for 2-3 months. I was living at my dad's. I moved out of the cabin we were living in. I'd go and check on his mom, take care of her every now and then. He'd stop by. There was a time where I just literally locked myself up in my dad's house, and I told him, you're not welcome unless you're clean. He sat in his van for 3 weeks straight in my driveway, getting clean, staying sober. He's like, I am not going to leave this driveway until you know that I'm clean. I'm just going to quit cold turkey in your driveway, and I'm not leaving. And I'm just like, okay, whatever, I don't care. I'm like, you can stay out there. So he went and he had a little propane heater in his van, and he'd just stay out there the whole time. So I'm just like, every time I cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I'd bring him a plate of food, and he's like, I'm sorry, can I come in yet? And I'm like, hell no. I'm like, I'll be back for the plate. So.
Hey, 3 weeks?
Yeah.
I mean, I get it, man. That's dedication, but I'd be like, come on, girl. It's been like, it's been 10 days, man. I'm in this van. Can't I come in, get a little snuggles?
Yeah.
I'm for real, dude.
Yeah.
10 days in a van, I'd be like, man, can I get in and get some snuggles? Maybe 4 hours of sleep on the bed, just a little bit, bro.
No.
I'm sure he tried.
He had he called his mom and had his daughter drive. His mom drove over with a twin mattress on their car roof, strapped down to put in his van.
That's dedication.
So wait, was he clean for the whole 3 weeks, or did it take him 3? Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. 10 days clean.
Van.
Hey, nope, another 11 days.
I was like, the first 4 days he wouldn't eat.
It's too sick.
He was too sick.
Yeah.
I just kept refilling him gallon jugs of water.
I'll be back for the jug.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, I mean, you get betrayed that many times?
Right, no.
Yeah, so...
Like I said, I get it, but...
I mean,
on the other hand...
He used to shoot up 2 30cc insulin syringes of heroin at a time. Wow. 2 of them. He was hardcore.
Yeah.
It took him an initial week, almost week and a half, to kick, all the symptoms of, yeah, it was pretty bad. Like, he would not look good at all. So that happened. We ended up making up after about 3 weeks. Told him he was welcome to come in the house, say hi to my son, and all this. And I'm just like, at this time, we know I'm pregnant.
Your son's at the house with you. And is he ever looking out and being like, hey, Mom, what's this guy doing in the van?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
What'd you say? He's sick?
Yeah. Well,
he
knew
can't
that
get
it was
sick right now.
He knew who it was, and he was just like, he knew we were like fighting, and I'm just like, no, he's in timeout. You know, go play.
All right.
My son would just be
Your
like,
son's
okay.
like, man, I hope I don't get put in. I don't want to go to timeout.
I don't want to go to the timeout van, bro. I'm definitely not.
Timeout van.
I'm definitely going to hang out there for 3 weeks.
If you don't put that away, 3 weeks in the van.
Yeah.
Well,
I swear, if
so
you don't
like,
eat the vegetables,
Go on.
so yeah. If you don't eat the dang Brussels sprouts, you're going in the timeout van.
Brussels sprouts gone.
right?
Yeah.
So I invited
Okay.
him in the house.
Yeah.
We hung out for a little bit, about a couple hours, and then we go to his mom's. We all ride together in the van, go to his mom's, hang out with his mom for a little bit. We're all clean.
Mm-hmm.
We start working on my 91 Mustang in his mom's garage. I take off in my Jeep to go get, so my dad picks me up in my Jeep, head back to the house. I leave my son with him, and I drive my Jeep into Kasilov to a buddy's shop. And I'm just like, okay, I'm pregnant. We don't know how far along. We just know that I'm pregnant. I can't get a test to tell me I'm pregnant, but I feel pregnant. There's something wrong there.
Yeah.
I'm constantly getting sick. I had a hole in my radiator, and it was like January time, and every time if it would drop below 20 degrees, my radiator would freeze up and my vehicle would just stall on the side of the highway.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't start it, keep heat in it, nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, well, one of these times I'm just going to like either freeze to death in my car or I'm going to have to leave to go fix it. So I went to my buddy's shop, tore the whole front core support off, and started fixing the radiator. And got it fixed, put it all back on, went in to go hang out in a friend's house, get something to eat, and I ended up getting a phone call at like 3 a.m. from his mom. Mm-hmm. And I look at my phone and I'm like something just came over me, like something's wrong here. That his mom does like, and his mom would call me routinely, you know.
But not 3 a.m.
Yeah. Well, sometimes she would if nobody was there with her, once in a while she'd be like, I'm scared, I'm lonely, you know, come and spend the night with me. There were multiple times where I'd just go and sleep in his mom's bed with her just so she'd go to sleep. And just something really weird that happened that day when I got that phone call. So she ends up calling again. Like, as soon as the phone hung up, I didn't answer it. She calls again. And at that point, I'm just like, something really bad is going on. I answer the phone, and she tells me he's dead. And I'm just like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean he's dead? He's in the garage, and he's dead. Like, me and your dog almost died, too. So, apparently, I don't really know what happened. I heard so many different stories. But he was trying to fix the van. There was an exhaust leak through the dash. And whenever I'd climb in it, I'd end up having really bad nosebleeds and severe headaches. And me being pregnant at the time was not good.
So some kind of like carbon monoxide leak or something?
Yeah. Into the van. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way we caught the fact that there was a leak at all, was from my nosebleed and headaches. I went to the clinic and they figured out that I had carbon monoxide poisoning. So he was trying to find the leak and fix it and patch it. Well, I guess some of his friends stopped by, and he hadn't done heroin or anything in 4 months, and he decided to, do a shot, and
no tolerance.
No tolerance.
Yeah.
And it just wiped him out.
Yeah.
Well, he passes out in the driver's seat with the dash all torn apart, and the garage door was halfway open.
And he already had a repressed breathing.
Mm-hmm. And so he passed out in the driver's seat. It was running. He always left the garage door halfway open. It was probably like 28 below that day.
And his friends closed it?
And the next door neighbors closed it. Didn't know he was in there.
Yeah.
With the vehicle running. So his mom's entire apartment filled up with carbon monoxide. And the alarms went off. The next door neighbor was able to get his mom and my dog out in time. They didn't know he was in the van. So he ended up dying of carbon monoxide poisoning.
Wow.
And after that happened, I went into Kasilof, hung out with my friends. Literally didn't leave. Like, I told Dad, like, take care of Zeke for a little while. Like, I gotta go get my head right. And I'm just hanging out at my friends and...
Getting loaded?
No.
No.
Mm-mm.
You're still clean at this point?
Yeah, I'm clean, pregnant. I'm hanging out with all my friends that are getting loaded, and I'm trying my damnedest not to.
Right.
Like, I'm just sitting there. Like,
That's hard.
I couldn't even pick. Like, I didn't want to do anything.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah.
I was just. I can't even say dragging. I was like a 1,000-pound boulder that just couldn't move.
Yeah.
So, his daughter calls me the night that he died, and she's just like, he's still breathing. Like, if you make it here, you can see him before they take him away. And I couldn't move. I just, like I said, I turned into a 1,000-pound boulder and just sat there for 3 days. Just sat there, like, in shock and awe. Like, didn't know what to do. When I finally did get in my Jeep and drove that way, I was just, like, crying hysterically. I almost wrecked. Like, made it home. Told my dad, like, you know, I'm just going to be in my room. And I've always told my son, my room's always open. You know, it's always open. I ended up locking my door off and on. I quit cooking. I quit doing everything, the usual chores and all that. His mom kept calling me constantly, like 3-4 times a day, like, you need to come over. I need help with this. I need to do this. And I'm like, okay. So I'd get up. I'd go over there. And just knowing that he died in her garage was just like, why do you even call me over here? Like, so I was like stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like, I wanted to be there to help her, but I didn't want to be there because that's where he died. Like, so all this stress built up, and I ended up having a miscarriage 9 days after he died. His mom was like, I'm so sorry. I just wanted to keep you close, keep you busy so you wouldn't go relapse and do something stupid. And I ended up, like, what set it off was I show up over there 9 days later, and she's trying to commit suicide with her insulin. She's just, like, shooting up as much insulin to get her sugars to spike and go DKC. Instant diabetic coma is what she was shooting for. She had just lost her baby. And I was like, okay, well, I had to call 911 and get her admitted to the hospital, and they put her in the suicide room. Then they medevaced her up to Anchorage. I checked her blood sugars, and the meter wouldn't even register her numbers. All it could say was high. High. That is all it could say. The highest a meter can go, I think, is like 500, and all it said is high.
Wow.
Count was way too high. They found that her sugars were like over 1,000. We couldn't give her anything to bring her sugars down. We had to try and get her to eat. Like, it was insane watching how she was acting with her sugars that high. Like, she just kept saying, I can't turn it on, and she just kept hitting the on button, and it just, like, her meter kept restarting. And that's all she, like, it was crazy. So I end up turning his mom in for suicide watch, and I have a miscarriage, and I literally go down the street to the clinic, see my doctor, and she's like, yep, you are having a miscarriage as we speak. And then I just, like, I lose it at that point. I called our friends from Anchorage, and I'm like, all of our friends from Anchorage would call me every single day. How you doing? Don't do anything stupid. We love you, blah, blah, blah. Like, some of them even drove the 3-hour drive just to come down and see me, make sure I wouldn't do anything stupid after he killed himself. Like, there's speculation that, you know, he did it on purpose.
Wasn't
like,
quite an accident, sure.
Yeah. Like, maybe it was suicide, maybe it was an accident. Like, nobody just really knows. So it was just, like, hardcore at that point. At that point, I was like, oh, I lost the baby. So some of his friends came down from Anchorage, and I just went all out for, like, I partied hard for 3 months. And then I got tired of doing heroin and meth, so I dropped the heroin. Like, I was like, that's the thing he died from. Like, for a minute there, I was just like, it won't hurt me, you know, like, it was absolutely. So a few months later, I end up meeting my daughter's dad, and we're just doing meth. At that point, I was staying at a severe alcoholic's house, and literally all that was there was just alcohol. Me and my son had nowhere to go. My dad kicked me out, so.
He did?
Yeah.
Wow.
So this dude takes me.
Why? It seemed like, I mean, he had been
'cause I was
allowing a lot of stuff for a lot of years, and what,
right.
He decided, like, too much is too much?
My dad,
When
I
did
can't
that
remember.
How does that happen?
I can't remember exactly what it was about.
I wasn't seeing that coming, you know?
Neither was
Seemed
I.
like Dad was pretty well, for lack of a better word, I mean, pretty enabling, pretty tolerant throughout all this.
Right. And then I go to leave one time with my son to go grocery shopping in town, and my dad just flipped. He's like, you're not.
He's like, no.
He's like, you're not going anywhere with him.
Yeah.
Like, he's not leaving. So my dad, like, I'm, like, picking up my son. He's sleeping. My dad ripped my arm. Mm-hmm. My son dropped, hit his head. Cops got called. Like, this is the first fist fight me and my dad have ever gotten into. And it's over me leaving with my son to go get groceries and file for food stamps and all this. And I'm just like, I'm going to go do something, like, responsible, even though I don't have a driver's license, but I have shit I have to take care of.
Were you loaded at that point, though?
No.
Had you been using kind of consistently, though?
Yeah.
So your dad, I mean, he probably had a pretty...
My
he
dad...
was thinking you might be going to get loaded and had probably some pretty decent reason to think so?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So he's, like, got pretty good reason to think so, and then on the other hand, you're like, no, dude, for real, I'm trying to go do these things.
Yeah.
So you both are just super irritated.
Yep.
Yeah.
So my dad, like, I locked my son in the Jeep to go grab some clothes and stuff. Like, he was throwing me out at that point. He calls the cops and tells them I'm trying to leave with no driver's license or insurance with my son in the car.
Sure.
So the cops show up and they tell my dad, like, they're like, you can't assault her when her son is in her arms. Like, you just endangered the life of that baby, and this is not okay. Like, we understand your valid point. She doesn't have a driver's license and no insurance, but she's the mom. You can't take her son from her. It doesn't matter if you're the grandparent. My dad got arrested, and the cops, they called the sergeant out, and the sergeant followed me in my vehicle to my buddy's house that was a severe alcoholic. And the cops made sure that I had the vehicle, my kid, and whatever else I needed. And, yeah. So I called...
And you probably knew going to this guy's house, like, this is bad news, but I don't have this is all I can think of right now?
Right. Anywhere else, there was, like, high traffic of meth or heroin or anything else. I mean, this guy was just a laid-back drunk. Like...
He's the lesser of all the evils.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, he just gets so drunk, he'd pass out. Like, that's all he'd do. He'd just drink and pass out. And I was just like, well, don't have to be around anybody stupid or, you know, not entirely. So, but over the years, like, having so many problems with my foster brothers, the troopers were pretty well adjusted to my family and my situation. So they would always, every day, a cop would stop in and check on me, a state trooper. And I had this relationship, like a good friendship with this one trooper, and he'd stop and check on me every day. He used to pick me up when he'd see me walking to school and stuff, and he'd drop me off at home. He was taking me to go grocery shopping here and there. When he knew that me and my son got kicked out, he actually went grocery shopping for me and dropped off more than $300 in groceries. And he contacted a lady that worked for Fish and Game, and she went and bought me 2 50-pound bags of dog food for my dog. And they stopped in routinely. Cops would always stop every day, pick my son up for school, bring him to school, and then he'd ride the bus back.
I didn't even know cops did that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, not usually.
Sure.
Anyways, it kind of sucked because that state trooper, he was the only one stationed in Anilchik for years, and he always had like no tolerance for this one particular family of alcoholics that would always drive drunk. So he was always trying to watch out, you know. He'd always pull them over. Well, they kept filing harassment charges on him, so he was deployed to another part in the state without losing his job, so he had to transfer somewhere else. And so, you know, that kind of ended. Now he's in Fairbanks, and I see him every now and then when I go there, say hi. But, so I end up calling a girlfriend who used to live here in Soldotna. Her and her husband got divorced, so she moved to Nikiski with her kids, and they were doing visitation and all this. I called her, told her what was going on, told her, at this point, I just found out that I was diagnosed with, I got really sick one day. Super sick. I started taking Tylenol around the clock. Every time I woke up, I was in so much pain. I took 1,000 milligrams every 2 hours just to go back to sleep. And I did this for about 6 days straight. Well, I called my dad out of the blue, and I was like...
It's a little tough on the organs.
Yeah. I called my dad out of the blue, and I'm like, something's wrong with me. Like, I feel like I'm dying. Something is not right. So my dad came over. He saw me, and he just kept coming over every day, seeing how I was, how I looked. And by the 6th day, he was like, nah. He just picked me up, put me in the truck, took me to the clinic. Well, they started running tests and everything, and they found out that I had Hep C at that point, and it was genotype A1, whatever. It's like the most serious geno there is. There was like no cure for it, and it just like... So basically what they found was I was going through multiple organ failure. I had Hep C, and when I overdid the Tylenol, that's what shut down my liver. Mm-hmm. My kidneys started shutting down. Like my sides were completely black, blue, and purple from all my kidneys and my liver shutting down. My hair was just like straw. There was like no nutrients in it. I was completely white, and as native as I am, I should not be white at all. So they put me on an IV drip, put me on antibiotics, and they kept me there for about 12 hours. They requested that Anchorage fast ship down some medications, and I ended up taking like 3 handfuls of pills all at once, and then they kept me there for about half hour, saw that I wasn't rejecting any of the medications, and sent me home. So at this time, my dad let me back into the house. He was taking care of my son, and my dad was constantly making me soup, trying to make me drink. I couldn't move, get out of bed. And then my girlfriend comes back out, and my dad's still kind of being an at this time. So she picks me and my son up, and we go out to her place, and she's just like nursing me back to health because my dad was like mainly taking care of my son, which I was grateful for. So I go and stay with her for a while, and she nurses me back to health. She helps me get back on my feet. I get a job. She took care of my son while I worked, she was an at-home mom of 3. And, yeah. So anyways, I ended up meeting my daughter's dad out at her place. We were partying here and there. Again, started partying, doing meth again. And ended up moving in with him and his family. We stayed in his parents' basement. He kept running out on me for his other baby mama. And at this point, I didn't really care. I was just like, well, whatever. Like, I was happy to just have a roof over me and my son's head. All I had to do was clean, in place of rent and stuff, because his mom had a triple bypass done on her heart and had stents put in. So I just cleaned and took care of the household while her husband worked, and she was recovering. I did that for years. Over the course of years, he ended up trying heroin. And I told him at one point, like, I don't care for heroin. I don't want it anywhere near me or my son. And I found out that he was using it with this other chick, and shit just really hit the fan. We started fighting a lot. I was bouncing back and forth between his parents and my dad's house. Like, we'd make up and then break up, make up and break up.
Your dad's got to get
it was
suspicious again, right? He's like, okay, like kicked her out, let her back. Now she's...
Well, me and my dad went through a period where we didn't talk. Like, it was the first feud me and my dad ever had for like 9 months straight. I wouldn't let him see his grandson. We didn't talk. Like, anytime we did, it was just all on hate messages. Like, I had to block my dad. I had to put a restraining order on him. And finally, almost a year of not having anything to do with my dad, because my dad kept trying to file for custody of my son, kept trying to call OCS on me, and every time OCS would show up, I'd tell him right at the door, you got a cup, you got a waiver in your bag, give me both. I'd sign the paper, go piss in the cup, give him the cup, and told him not to show back up. Not unless you have a reason to. So...
But I thought you were using meth at this point.
I was, but I would get clean for periods of time and then do it again.
Yeah, and meth is what, a 3-day thing generally in the system?
3 days to a week, yeah.
So if you had been clean for like 5, 6, 7, 8 days, you were good?
Yeah.
Sure.
So you're not consistently using meth at this point?
Not like every day?
Not every day. It was more
once
like...
Once a week?
Yeah, maybe once a week.
Maybe twice?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't very often.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe like 1 to 3 bowls in one day, here and there. Definitely not often enough. Like, we were trying to stay under the radar of his parents.
Sure.
And living in their basement, it was a little difficult.
Yeah.
Lights out at a certain time.
Yeah, while you're doing all your
noise,
cleaning
like,
at 4 a.m.?
Yeah. Like, you're not supposed to look like...
We know you're asking you to clean for rent, but man, at 4?
If you couldn't vacuum the drapes at 6, that'd be great.
You know?
Dang it, there it is again.
So, yeah, at times the house would be completely spotless. Like, I didn't have a job or anything. I'm just cleaning house, and her husband started buying us packs of cigarettes as an allowance for cleaning so well. You know, so it was... really interesting. It was like that for over a year. But about 2 years into our relationship, that's when we really started. I'm bouncing back and forth between my dads. Because once he started using heroin, it was like an emotional roller coaster. Like, he liked me, he hated me. He loved me, he hated me. He liked me. It just was back and forth. Like, he couldn't make up his mind whether he wanted me, he didn't want me, or he loved me, he hated. Like, it was insane. And half the time I wouldn't even bring my son with me. I'd just go up there, see him, go back home. You know, and that happened for so long. That was about the first time I actually thought about treatment. We were living in an RV in the front of his parents' house in their driveway. And
maybe I missed something. Why weren't you in the basement anymore? Did I miss something there?
No, just there wasn't really any privacy, and his parents needed that space. So, and we wanted our own space, so we just moved into an RV.
And were they kind of catching on?
A little bit, yeah.
Sure.
Well, okay, so one time we snuck in a couple of his friends through the garage. And the garage happens to have stairs that go right down into the basement. And on the other side of the basement, there's stairs that go up to the first level of the house. Well,
Wrong stairs.
we snuck in. Some of his friends were all partying in his bedroom. Well, they broke the meth pipe on the door, and so we go up to the garage. I'm the only one that knows how to blow glass. So they're having me blow glass in his parents' garage.
It's so funny because you say that
Wait,
like it's like
And
you
I'm
you say
like-
it like it's like so crazy that you're the only one, as if everybody knows how to blow glass. And I'm the
it
only
was-
one that knows how to blow glass.
I
And I'm
was.
sitting here, I'm like,
It-
dude, I don't think I know that many people that know how to blow
No,
glass.
I know
There
one.
might be more people
I
than
literally
you
know
know.
two people, dude. I know two people.
Well, a lot of the people, the crowds that I hung
Yeah,
around were dealers, and they all knew
Yeah.
how to take care of themselves.
Sure.
Like,
But they just
Okay.
had, you
But
just
it
had
just,
glass
like-
blowing kits around?
no, you
Glass
just
blowing.
need a torch and a glass tube
Oh, okay.
and experience.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
So, like,
What do you
they're-
basically
he's-
just get it
he's just,
really
like-
hot and then blow your bubble?
pretty
Try
much
not to
burn
blow your
yourself,
face off,
melt
yeah.
anything, burn the house down. Yeah.
pass out, drop it on you.
Oh
That
yeah.
happened at the last recovery story we heard.
Almost.
The guy was
Yeah.
blowing glass and passed out on a big bubble, I guess, and passed out and dropped it.
Oh
and
well,
dang
that's what
near-
happened to the RV
dang near
later
became
on.
infertile.
Like, we'll
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
So,
Peter's bed.
I'm blowing glass in his parents' garage, and that was like one of my rules. Like, that was his parents' rules. Like, when they started catching on, they were like, "Don't ever do that shit in our house. Like, you both will be kicked out." So I was like, okay. So I'm just like tripping. Like, I'm high and I'm tripping. I'm like, I can't believe you guys are making me do this in your parents' house. Like, this is stupid. So then he makes me blow too. I blow too. One breaks in the garage, and I'm like, you had me do this, I'm not cleaning it up. Well, he's like, well, I already got one, and I don't need the other one, so whatever. So him and his buddy just take off. I'm like, okay,
Into
whatever.
that bedroom or out of
they
the house?
just left in his vehicle, and they left the broken pipe in his stepdad's garage on the ground. Didn't even clean it up. I went to bed. I was just like, whatever. I'm like, you're
You
going to
went
get in
bed?
trouble for this.
But
And-
weren't you pretty loaded? Oh, you went to your bedroom.
yeah.
Okay.
Well, I went to lay down. Like, I started coming down at that point.
Huh.
They took off with the pipe, left the broken one in there, and then they blamed it on me. They said that, oh, I'm such a big meth head that I couldn't help but go into the garage and make my own pipe, and I was going to do meth secretly. And him and his buddy blamed it all on me. Like, I'm like, I don't have any meth on me. They were making me blow them a pipe, okay, so my boyfriend was like trying to blackmail me, like, if you don't blow me this pipe, I'm going to get you kicked out for being a meth head type deal. Like, I'm going to just throw you under the bus with my parents, and you and your son won't have any place to live. So I'm just like, oh my God, you're such a... So I blow them a pipe, and then he was getting pissed off at me because I'm not blowing fast enough. So that's when the first one broke. I was like, psh, you want to, like, you really want to make me do this? I don't have to do this. Y'all don't know what you're doing, you know? So they started treating me a little better, so I blowed them the second one, and they left. I go to bed. After that, like, his parents were like, okay, y'all can get out of the house. Like, so we moved into the RV. Things started going okay, except he's, like, whenever I wasn't there, he was bringing over random girls. Like, there was a time where he kicked me out for a 16-year-old. So stupid. So I was like, whatever. Anyways, long story short, I go to jail for DV. And then a month later, he goes to jail for a DV. OCS steps in. So I try treatment for the first time. I come into treatment.
At Serenity House?
Yep, here at Serenity House.
How many years ago?
3
Okay.
now?
Yeah.
2. Maybe 2.5 years ago. So it didn't work. I made it into residential treatment for about 11 days, and I got kicked out
Why?
because my boyfriend kept calling the house and calling, like, he'd hit redial when I'd go to call during my phone call hours at the house. I'd be able to call out, call family. Well, he hit redial, and he just kept calling, like, and he'd be high, and he was threatening to show up with a shotgun and shoot anybody if they wouldn't let him talk to me. He started calling the intake office and threatening to come in and just create a bunch of mayhem and chaos if he couldn't see me or talk to me. And I'm in my blackout period for the first
What are
week.
they telling you? You need to quit calling this guy, and you keep calling him?
Nope. Like, it didn't start happening until 3 days after my phone calls started.
Okay.
So, like,
Which blackout's
I'm
the first
day
week,
9
right?
in treatment. Blackout is for 1 week,
Yeah.
7 days. You can't talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And so, like, 9 days into it, I get kicked out, like, 2.5, 3 days later for the safety of everybody in residential treatment and for everybody in the program. I got brought here to the intake office, and so the administrator, Dr. Sellers, was trying to come up with an idea with the other counselors, like, what to do with me. Like, I'm trying to get my kids back. I want to get clean, but this part of my life is making it hard to allow it to happen. So they want to ship me off to Juneau, and then just the thought of, like, going to Juneau, like, I don't know anybody, like, I don't know how it's going to be down there. I haven't heard anything all that great about Juneau. Like, there's just as much crap that goes on in Juneau than there is here. And shipping me off to another treatment center may not have even helped my scenario, just because I'm going to be running away from all my problems here that I'm going to have to face when I come back, and I may not know how to. And if I don't complete treatment in Juneau, I'm stuck down there and have to find my own way back. So, and the judge court-ordered me to remain in town to keep a constant schedule visitation with my children, because my daughter at the time was 4 months old when she got taken. My son was 7. So I was, like, kind of stuck between another rock and a hard place. I either leave for treatment, leave my kids, I don't see them, my daughter doesn't know who I am, and my son thinks I abandoned him. So I ended up getting kicked out of treatment altogether. I stayed clean. I was clean for 4 months by the time I got accepted into Serenity House. When I got kicked out, I stayed clean for about 9 months. So I stayed clean for like 4 months after I got kicked out of Serenity House. I went to meetings every day. I had a sponsor. I started doing the whole thing, and then every time I felt like I was getting somewhere with OCS and treatment, like I went to Cicada. Cicada didn't help whatsoever. There were more people in the groups doing drugs there than there were with Serenity House. Like, it's just not allowed at Serenity. Totally different approach to treatment. So I ended up relapsing on meth. I ended up failing Cicada. They kept trying to up my groups and get me to be there more often, spend more time in groups, and it just wasn't working. I ended up failing my UAs routinely, quite routinely, for like 6, 7, 8 months. They used to pull UAs on me like twice a week, and I was failing them for months on end. Finally, when I just got to a point where I couldn't get out of bed anymore, like there was just no point in trying. Lost my kids. I didn't even care to party. I just stayed in bed. Like, I was just so depressed. That's when I decided I really wanted to, like, I saw my relationship going nowhere. He had already found somebody else, like, on the side. And so I was just like, well, whatever. So I went back to my dad's, just pretty much stayed in bed, lost my kids. Didn't really have any reason to get up or try and go to treatment, because it just wasn't going to happen. Like, something would happen and I just wouldn't be able to finish. So I ended up, my neighbor liked to come over and party. Like, he'd drink or he'd do meth with me every now and then, but we'd always talk about deep, meaningful things like family, like where to go from here, what are we going to do, like... He just always come over and just, like, it'd basically be like a counseling session, really. Just a free one every now and then. And so we started talking, and then somewhere along the lines, he got me amped up to hitchhike all the way into town, get my doctor's appointments taken care of. Because you need to do, like, full physicals and all this to even get ready for treatment. So I hitchhiked into Kenai and Soldotna for 3 days straight. The second day when I was walking home, a pastor from the Nilchik saw me walking, and he picked me up, brought me home. He saw me walking into town the next day, brought me back in for my intake. Another person in the program, when I was staying out at my dad's, he was in recovery, drove carts. He always did my round trip rides from, I think the nearest place to pick me up was Clam Gulch, and I lived in Nilchik. That's like 15, 20 miles. I'd hitchhike every day just to make it to visitation for my kids so I wouldn't lose my visitation rights. I did that for like 11 months, and then after doing that for so long, I got tired of doing the same old thing. Like, it was basically where I'm just seeing my kids for 1 hour a day, and I'm spending all day walking, nothing's changing. It was just like I got to see my kids, but after it was over, life just sucked again. Like, I didn't want to do it anymore, so I started hitchhiking, coming into town, getting my appointments and stuff, and my buddy would always come over and he'd give me these pep talks like, you can continue to do this, just do it, and something's got to change. It can't all be downhill. So I was like, all right, I'm like, I'll try this one last time, and if I don't get anywhere, there's just no point. Like, I'm not gonna do everything I possibly can, walk my ass off, go all the way into town, risk my life, freaking through whatever weather, going 40, 60 miles a day. There's just no point if I can't get anywhere. There's no change. So, I kept showing up, and I kept calling Serenity House. Like, I must have blocked their lines for a week straight, because I just kept calling. Can I get in yet? Can I get in yet? Like, even if I got off the phone with them, and they're like, oh, give us a day or two, I'd be like, can I get in yet? Like, I just would not stop. I was like, put me to the top of the list. I need to do this. Like, I have less than a year to get my kids back at this point. And finally, within 13 days, they got me into treatment. And I was in residential treatment for 32 days, and I graduated. I spent, I want to say 10 months in outpatient before I relapsed. I relapsed once, almost got kicked out of the entire program. Came back with flying colors. I had them put me back into residential treatment for a refresher course so my wouldn't fall off, and I just went back out running. They agreed with me that was a good thing. My relapse came about because I was put on this medication for major depression and anxiety. And it's one of these psych meds that you cannot miss whatsoever. Like, you will have withdrawal symptoms like you've never felt in your entire life. Well, it was...
What was that, like an Effexor?
Was that like
Paxil.
Antidepressant booster?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Basically,
I've heard some crazy stuff about those.
It's so it's like my happy pill and my anxiety reliever all at once. It keeps my depression at bay. Without it, I'm just like a zombie.
Yeah.
Without it,
Right.
there's really, because I did meth for so long, my brain no longer produces the chemical needed to keep me happy.
Wow.
Sure. Probably serotonin.
Yes.
Yeah.
My
And
brain...
likely, I don't know what Paxil, but a lot of the antidepressant and anxiety medications are not necessarily the anxiety, those are going to be benzos likely, but oftentimes with depression you'll either get an SSRI, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor.
Yeah.
And that just lets the serotonin pool up in your brain.
Right.
Or you're going to get an SSNRI, which is a selective serotonin and neuroepinephrine or norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, which is going to let that serotonin and the norepinephrine pool up. So
Right.
I bet you were on, I don't know what Paxil is, but I bet you were on an SSNRI.
Yeah.
I bet.
My brain doesn't produce serotonin anymore, so
Sure.
without it, I can't function as a normal human being.
Right. I mean, it's critical.
I'm basically like a zombie with no feelings.
Yeah.
I can do basic things, but I will have no emotion involved in anything I do.
Wow.
So, it was, this was just last December. It was about Christmas break, and I was running low on my meds. I tried to get everything fixed before Christmas break started. I went to Denina, tried getting my scripts written up for over the holiday break, and the lady wrote the script, but she never sent it off. And when they send it off, they send it to A&MC up in Anchorage, and then the hospital up there sends me my medications by mail, and they send me 6 months to a year worth by mail all the time. There isn't no pharmacy that can give me that quantity without me paying a really big copay. So they just ship it to me. And she didn't send any of it off, so I'm stuck withdrawing. I went to work for 4 days withdrawing off of my psych meds, and I finally looked at my manager and I was like, I gotta go. Like, I haven't been on my meds for 4 days. I'm surprised I'm still functioning. Like, I was shaking. I was pooling sweat. I started getting sick. Like, I almost wanted to my pants, puke my brains out. Like, I just was not feeling good.
Yeah.
She let me go. I spent a whole week trying to get my script. Like, I went to pharmacies. I even brought my empty pill bottles. I was like, look, it says 3 refills on it. Like, I need these pills. Like, half of them were just looking at me like, oh, you're a drug seeker, like, whatever. I went to my doctor's office. They're closed. I tried calling my doctor. Like, everybody turned me down. I went to Freddy's, Walgreens, Walmart, Three Bears, all with my empty pill bottle. And they're like, we can't do this without your doctor sending an actual script. I was like, well, this is a damn script. Like, it was filled. It says 3 refills, and the pharmacy I filled it at is closed for 2 weeks. Like, give me a break. Like, they're like, well, if no one's there, they can't transfer that script over to us. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Like, this is obviously legit. It's got my name, everything. Nope, couldn't do it. So I go to Denina.
So you call your dealer, you're like, yo, you got any Paxil? They're like, nah, dude, that's like hitting us up for birth control.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Yo, you got any of that birth control?
Like, it just so happened, like, oh, it's so messed up. So I go to the ER, and they're like, okay, what's your problem? And I'm like, I am withdrawing. So they automatically assume that I'm withdrawing off hard drugs. Well, they put me in the detox room, in the emergency room, and I'm like, no, like, I am detoxing off my psych meds. Like, I am not feeling great. And they're like, well, we're really glad you came in because people withdrawing this hard off of this dosage on this kind of medication, most people would kill themselves because of the withdrawals. And I was like, yeah, well, I've been withdrawing for 4 days. And they're like, so why'd you have to come in here to get your, get refill? And I'm like, look, I've been through all the proper channels. I've tried going to all the pharmacies. I've tried seeing a doctor. No doctor will take me on without looking at my medical records from my doctor's office that's closed for the next 2 weeks. So next best bet is come to the ER. I know you guys have a pharmacy here, and you'll give me what I need and write me a small script that might get me by until the office is open again. And they're like, okay. So they did that. They gave me one pill at the max dose, think it was like 40 milligrams because I've been off it for 4 days. I took the pill. They gave me a script for 3 pills. That's all they could do. They couldn't even do 4 because it was way past the dollar amount, basically, for what they can release through a pharmacy. So they gave me 3 pills to go get. So I went and picked them up at Walmart. And once I ran out of those, I started withdrawing again. I still had like 5-6 days before the offices opened. So at that point, I was just like, all right, well, I need to do something. So I could feel shudders in my brain. Basically, what it felt like was like my blood pressure was going off the charts. I could feel every blood vein in my body just compulsing, just constricting and restricting, like really hard. My heart would pound so freaking hard. My brain felt like it was shuddering. I'd get really shaky. I'd get irritable. I couldn't get up. I'd get really nauseated. I'd feel like my legs would get weightless. They wouldn't work. Basically like sea legs without water. So I ran out and I ran into my dealer in Kenai. And I was just like, look, like, I explained to him my medication, what it does, and then, like, I am without. So he just, like...
Hit you with a Xan?
No, he gave me a little bit of meth. And it didn't fix anything. It masked everything.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
It masked all of my withdrawal symptoms, and I didn't feel any of them for about the next 3 days until everything opened back up. Serenity House was even closed. There was like nowhere I could turn to. I even went to the ER, tried using the best with what I could. And I finally went to everybody and was just like, well, I went and did a hair follicle and I failed it.
Right.
At that point, the judge was just like,
wow.
And
that sucks because you had quite a while of...
Like 9-10 months clean.
Yeah.
And the judge was like, well, this is your last chance to get your kids. Like, don't mess up again. And she was like, I'm surprised you relapsed so late in the game. Like, and then, like, so, my presence in treatment was being reevaluated at that point, and the situation was explained, like, for what it really was. I kept trying to lie. Like, I didn't relapse. Like, I tried using other excuses, to cover up the fact that I relapsed. Like,
and they're like, well, we have ran the results and we have determined that is a lie.
Yeah. I was like, no, like they ran the results 3 times because I was like, I didn't use, like it must have gotten that beacon, like, you know, so many people go in there, like, oh man, I was so like milking it big time. Like I did not want to lose my kids. Like I worked really hard for that 10 months and I f***ed it up.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, fine. Like, I finally confessed, like, everything. They looked into it, and it turned out that, you know, I wasn't on my meds. Like I finally broke out and told them everything. So they stuck me back in house. I stayed in house for about 14 days, I think. And I was, like, house leader in residential because... At that point in time, I was looked at as having the most clean time being back in house with all the newcomers. So I was to basically show them responsibilities of how to be in the house, how to react at meetings, how not to react and respond, and help them with any assignments that were given in the house. So I graduated again from residential treatment, went to outpatient, and I discussed with my counselor that I wanted to be on a very strict outpatient regimen. So I went to every single group they had to offer. I moved into the transitional living home for women, and I paid $200 in rent a month when I could. I helped try to provide groceries. It gave me my own space. Gave me a place to have visitations with my children once I was able to gain access to having unsupervised visits. Serenity House let me do my visitations in their group room whenever it was open with my kids. Yeah, I just went to every single group that they had to offer. I did all the other exercise group activities they had, Tai Chi Do, yoga, whatever was available. I just stayed busy.
So when we do these recovery stories, one of the things we like to hear is kind of especially people that kind of gave it a go, gave cleaning up a go, and then kind of had to try again. It sounded like this time I said I want a strict outpatient regimen. Is that one of the things you realize, like, okay, I do the in-house thing, like there's a lot of structure there, but when I get out, like I can't go from all this structure to no structure, or having to create all of that by myself. There was
no way I could have created that by myself.
That's hard, right?
I explained the situation to all the counselors in the house. I'm from the Nilchik with no vehicle. Like, I can't do outpatient, and I ain't walking every day. I did that to get in here in the first place. And in Nilchik,
like, you have this environment and all these other kind of triggers, I guess, so to speak, that are like, oh, when this happened in this, like, when this used to happen in this house, like, I used to go do meth. When this used to happen, I used to go do this, like, negative coping mechanism, and you're just like, I can't go back there.
One of the some solid strict rules with my counselor was I couldn't have any communication or contact with my daughter's dad. Because of the chaotic relationship we had the first time and the second time I was in treatment. He was, good part of why I got kicked out the first time. So there was a restraining order against him from hospital property. After trying treatment again, trying to make things work, the administrator herself decided to take on me and him for couples counseling. And she dropped the restraining order and, allowing him to be a part of seeing my recovery. Monkey see, might monkey do. And it started bringing him into the process of recovery. And it's been really hard. Like, he'd get clean for a while and then he'd relapse. Like, it was...
Yeah, let's talk about this, because it seems like, and I know you are, so it's kind of redundant, but there's got to be, many, many, many people who are using for years with somebody, and then they kind of together say, like, let's get cleaned up. Or maybe one gets cleaned up and one doesn't. So what was that process like?
It was extremely difficult because the first time I went to treatment, he was absolutely against it. He's like, I'm never going to go. Like, I'll take the easy route out and just stop for a little bit and graduate Cicada. Like, no brainer. Well, I go to treatment, and I was really mad at him for getting me kicked out. I was like, I still love you, but I do not like you right now. Like, don't even talk to me. The whole way home, I was just like, don't, just whatever. I was so pissed. And his mom agreed with me at that point. So I tried talking him into it. We were going to groups, going to meetings all the time. We'd try the Cicada groups. Every now and then I would show up and I just wait out in the vehicle for him. We'd both go sometimes. Finally, we go to court one day. The judge orders us to complete inpatient treatment. We both have to. It is a must. If we don't get accepted within 90 days...
but you already had, it sounded like.
I started to, yeah. I was waiting at that point in time. So we're like going back a little bit. So
yeah, okay.
So we're waiting. Okay. I'm like on the waiting list. It took me 13 days to get into treatment the second time. So I helped him. His biggest issue, he's slightly autistic. So he has a hard time. He's ADD, like to the max. Right, so he could do meth and he'd just be like completely calm and normal. So It was really interesting because when he started going to Sakata and everything, like, and the judge was just like, you guys have to complete residential or it's, it's not going to happen. And we were both under the impression, like, in the beginning, oh, we could just, like, at first I was like, Serenity House, it's like the least amount of time in residential treatment before you graduate. Like, this will be a breeze, right? Well, not the case.
No.
Not whatsoever. The second time I went into treatment, I find out after I graduate, you have to complete outpatient, and that's 1 year.
Okay. Wow. 1
whole year of outpatient after you graduate residential. Something they fail to tell you when you have to do treatment. So, talk about mind blown. Well, ended up getting a MIC, is it a MIC 1? Drug charge. He got pulled over with his dealer one night, and I refused to go because I had this bad feeling something was going to happen or go extremely wrong. The headlights were up on the car. We were high. I was just like, nope, not having it. I'm going to stay home where it's safe, where there's like 3 bags of dope. It's fine. I'm just going to get loaded before I go to treatment. I'm just waiting for the call. And so another thing was I had a clean UA when I came in to do my intake, so it made my waiting a little longer to get put in.
Dude, I was just thinking of that. Okay, so there's my favorite movie. I know it's crazy. I say it's my favorite movie and then I forget the title, but it has one of my favorite actors in it, Jesse Eisenberg. And essentially what it is I think it's called, dude, I don't remember. But anyway, it's about, he's a pretty smart guy, piano prodigy, and he has to take his mom, who's like unstable, longtime drug user, and she's like, I'm going to treatment. And she has a daughter, so he has a younger sister. And she's like, I'm going to treatment. So he's like, heck yeah, you are. Like, you're going. I'm driving you. So he drives his mom to treatment. She goes in. She pees. She's clean. He goes, you don't have insurance, and this UA is clean. You think I'm going to be able to argue to your insurer that you need to be here? He's like, yeah. So I can't get you in. And he goes, but, kind of between us, like, if you were to come back and fail a UA, I'd get you in. And she goes, are you telling me I got to go get high? You're telling me to go get high? And he's like, I mean, that's kind of what I'm saying. And so the whole movie's about her. Like, they have to go score dope for her so she can get high and so she can go back and fail this UA.
That's basically what I was told. But that sounds like
what's happening. Yeah.
They're like, well, you have a clean UA, so it's going to take a while longer to get you in. And I'm like, are you telling me I have to go relapse and come back? And they, off the record, yeah. Okay, so I'm just getting loaded while I'm waiting in Kenai, and I'm like, all right, so I'm like, okay, well, I can't make it into Soldotna, so why don't I just go to Sakata, go to OCS, tell them to slap me with a UA at the nearest treatment center, have me fail it, and have them fax all that crap to OCS, and OCS fax the crap to here. And, yeah, I was able to get in.
Wow.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. So the judge ordered us both to complete residential treatment. So he was sent off to SARC in Anchorage because of his drug charge. He had to do minimum of 90 days inpatient residential treatment in order to not go to jail for, 6 to 9 months for a drug charge. So he went to SARC for the minimum of 90 days, got kicked out on his 91 day there for hiding a cell phone. And, he got sent back down here. For about 3 months, he relapsed, got clean. Finally, he went back to Sakata and really started just trying to maintain sobriety at Sakata. He just upped all his groups and everything, and the whole time I got into treatment and I just did it here. Yeah. So today he has about 10 months clean, and today I have just over 1 year.
Wow.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
Congrats.
Yeah.
So you completed inpatient and then you went to transitional living? Or was
Yes.
that okay?
I was there for... The funny part is when I came back the second time and I had to fail my UA to get into treatment, it was exactly 1 year later from the day I got accepted to come the first time. 1 year to the day when I came back asking for help. Dr. Sellers didn't want to allow me back into the program. She wanted to, they wanted me to write a letter. The first time I wrote a letter, it basically, and it's so weird because we saved the letters and I read them later. So my first letter, after I got kicked out of treatment the first time, I was like, okay, she wanted me to write a 3-page letter as to why I need to be in treatment. So my first letter basically just stipulates what I want, what I need, and I gotta have it now. A year later, I'm stuck, I'm broken, I've got Hep C, which I am cured of now because of treatment. You had to be clean for so long before you can even try certain drug trials for the cure of Hep because they want to know that the insurer isn't going to waste their money on somebody who's just going to go back out and get Hep again. Like, there's just no point. So the second letter I wrote stipulated where my health was 1 year later. And I'm like, I applied 1 year ago. I was in treatment for a little while, got kicked out due to a relationship that was completely unhealthy. This is where I'm at today. I want my son to be able to have his mom when he gets older. I want to be able to watch him. I want to be able to say that I am a mom that came back from addiction and turned everything around. I explained how I did have a heart murmur. My heart's enlarged. My lower left ventricle to my heart does not enlarge. When your heart enlarges, none of your blood vessels or veins go with it. So my heart leaks blood through the lower left ventricle. I do have an irregular heartbeat that I do have to take medication for. I have to take baby aspirin as well, so I'm not prone to heart attacks. Let's see. I explained where my life is at with OCS, where my children are, how long they've been gone, and how long I've been on this road, and how I don't want it anymore. And I begged Serenity House to let me back into the program.
So it sounded like that first letter was kind of like, I need this for me, this is what I need for me, and I need it now. And the second time is like, I need this for these people. Like, these people need me, therefore, like, I kind of need to be healthy.
Yeah, like, look what I did to myself. This is where I put myself, and I was completely okay with it. I'm not okay with this anymore. Like, for the first time, I'm seeing my life through someone else's eyes, and I'm trying to imagine it through the eyes of my children at this point. My children got to see me high during some visitations. It was not okay. There was a lot of health issues that I was having. There were times where I also couldn't get out of bed because it hurt too much. I couldn't even get up to go to the bathroom sometimes. Doctors told me that if I kept drinking or doing drugs, like, my organs are just going to shut down. Then there's no coming back from that. They're, like, transplants are not something that they can just do overnight or even in a month. Like, it is not anything that is realistic to even look at, especially for a drug user of 13 plus years.
So when you, so after you got out of transitional living, what did your recovery look like?
Okay,
what were some
so
of, like, the key moves you made, you feel
by
like?
the time, like, all right, so Serenity House was beginning to lose their grant funding to even have the women's transitional living home and the men's transitional living home, where they placed people that didn't have safe environments to go to after they graduated from residential treatment. So they were running out of their funding, and I was so close to getting an apartment. I waited 90 days to get my own apartment. I saved up money from 2 jobs that I had over the summer. I did volunteer work constantly around the clock, full 8-hour days, just helping out in the community, Bishop's Attic or other thrift stores in town. So I finally got a call about my apartment, and I needed $1,000 down on low-income housing. And so I called my grandma. I had about $600-700 already saved up, so my grandma sent me $650. And as soon as I got into the apartment, Serenity House Serenity House itself paid the bills for one whole week and a half, almost 2 weeks, for my paperwork to go through, for the down payment on the place to go through. Like, it took almost 14 days. I think it was the 13th day that I moved out. Serenity House paid the bills out of their own pocket to keep that house up, so I wouldn't be kicked out on the streets. Neither would the other girls. It kind of gave us all an advantage on being better prepared for that house to shut down. And I moved into the apartment, kept my job. I pay my bills always a month ahead of time. I'm right now building my credit as much as I can. I'm trying to get a vehicle right now. I have my children full time. I do home visits with OCS, where they come by, check the place out, see how the kids are doing. And this November, I am to be awarded custody of my children.
Wow.
Nice. That's
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's incredible. How's that feel?
Good.
Yeah. Pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
feels really great. It's kind of nice because my kids, they were getting tired of, like, it was always a new transition going back and forth between the foster parents, my place, grandparents, like, lots of fights with foster parents, with other people, just like, it was really hard.
Just want to be settled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Today, your recovery sounds like you work a lot. I know you had been working 2 jobs, and now you're working a lot. Still, as far as investing in recovery, what does that look like?
I go to meetings. I try to make at least one a week.
'Cause we know it sounds like it does obviously evolve,
Yes.
Sounds like people right out of the gates,
In
every
the
day,
beginning.
all day, every day kind of stuff. And then
Yep.
eventually you start picking up more, you start taking on more and more of life outside of like directly engaging
Yes.
in these things. And so
That's
now,
exactly how
do you
it
have
started
a sponsor?
out. Yes, I do.
Did you
She
get a
works-
sponsor pretty early?
Yes, my first sponsor, I've gone through 2 sponsors.
Sure.
My first one I
This is
let
your
go.
third?
This is my second.
Oh, okay.
Yep. My first one I let go about 5-6 months into it because she only worked a set of 3 steps with me and then stopped and started having recovery issues of her own. Just behavior
Sure.
issues that I didn't want to fall into making a habit. So I let her go, and I found another sponsor who works with Serenity House. She's actually an employee with
Sure.
Serenity House, and we've become very close over the whole year and a half. I processed my whole first set of steps with her, and I'm starting a different kind of steps outside of NA. It's a different 12-step program. So I'm doing different recovery methods at this point in my life as I'm having different
Things that you
different
want to
different
process.
problems
Yeah.
that
Different things to process.
yeah. So the beginning, my first year, a lot of it had to do with overcoming the emotional roller coaster of, being chemically dependent on something for so long. Now this year I am focusing on different life problems that I never got to face before that are quite different.
Yeah. Yeah.
But a lot easier to manage and deal with than the ones I had the first year in recovery.
Or at least now, like, when you have these problems, you don't also have the problem of an overwhelming constant drug addiction.
Right.
You know, you can actually deal with them.
Yes.
You know, despite being hard and complicated, you can actually approach them.
Yes.
It seems like.
Most definitely. I spend more time dealing with my issues than ignoring them anymore.
Yeah. Before we go, what are maybe, looking back like into your recovery process, what are maybe, a few things that you might recommend to people who are maybe looking to get into recovery, or maybe just getting started, or maybe have been there in a while and are just struggling? Like, what are like some things that you would recommend or that worked for you? Or like maybe that didn't work for you and that you would try something different?
The biggest thing for me was trying to get over my anxiety.
Sure.
Sometimes it's just so overwhelming it's hard to get out of your shell. Picking up the phone and asking for help in general is the biggest step towards making a difference.
We've heard that very often. In almost every story so far, that's been the biggest thing, is just taking that first step. Once you take that first step, well, I mean, it's actually like, it's honestly more of a second step, it seems like, because a lot of the stories that we've heard aren't first time, like, oh yeah, I got in, it went great, I've been out this long now. A lot of it is, I went to treatment the first time. We've had a couple people that have got kicked out, or one time they made it all the way through and just didn't work, so it's like, they ask for help once, but they're not, or they're forced to get help, through whatever system it may be. But it's like, when you finally really, really want to get clean, you took that first step, didn't really work, and that's going to make that first step harder again when it doesn't work the first time, I would imagine. Yeah. And so, I mean, it's like that first step, fail, then you really, really got to want it now, and you got to take that first step again. Like, and you got to call the same people that watched you fail the first time.
Right.
Like, that's, I would imagine, extremely humbling, but it's got to be almost fulfilling as well, just when it's finally over, and you're like, man, I just did a lot for myself. Like, that's,
yep,
it's got to be pretty amazing.
That it is. Another one is saying yes or no when it's appropriate. You gotta
get some boundaries.
Yeah, accept some sort of responsibility to know what would be best for you, yourself, your family, your friends. Just being able to say yes, I need help, and be able to say no if it's an unhealthy, my biggest thing was picking up that phone and talking to anybody. That was really hard for me. Calling treatment and saying, hey, I need treatment was really hard. Not knowing where to go, what to do, who to talk to even get the ball rolling was really difficult. Like, I've never done this before. Like, how does this happen? I'm not being forced to do it. I'm being asked to do it willingly. Like, I had absolutely no idea where to go. I saw a brochure with Serenity House on it. All it showed was the residential house, and I'm like, where do I go? Like, I had no idea, And it was actually one of my friends that, with carts, that he was like, you know what? Rather than driving you straight home, I'm going to drive you by the intake office so you know exactly where it's at and you know where to go when you come here next. Wow. And he drove me here, showed me where it was at, and from then on I kept trying to get in.
Yeah. So it sounds like really maybe not necessarily that first step in all of its, totality, but some level of recognition of how I'm managing my life now isn't quite working.
There was no managing.
Somewhat unmanageable. I need help. Like, I can't do this myself, kind of thing.
I felt like So my counselor asked me what part of my life was so unbearable that made me want to get into recovery. And I said, you know how people say that they feel stagnant, like they're not going anywhere, they're just stuck in one spot in their life? I told her, I'm like, I wasn't stagnant, I was glued. Mm-hmm. I was super glued.
Yeah.
Just stuck, stationary. Nothing was changing. And not for better or for worse. It was just the same every day. And it was really ridiculous. Like, I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't stand myself. I couldn't stand, like, how my children would view me, how hopeless I must have seemed to my dad or my grandmother that lived across the way. Like, it was... Life to me seemed very demeaning.
So, guys, for all those listeners out there who are looking to get into recovery or just need somebody to talk to, a good resource is going to be the Serenity House. Serenity Intake Office is off of Brinkley Street. Dang it.
Yes.
Dang it. Okay. So my brother has been calling it
so helpful.
Brinkley.
I'm so excited.
Aaron has been calling this, all you guys who are listening.
I thought you were trolling me.
Aaron has been calling Binkley Street Brinkley for the last week, and now I've been making fun of him. Well, for last month, and I've been making fun of him for the last couple of weeks. Brinkley, and then the other day we were talking in the car about it's like a flatbed trailer, and he called it a flatbread, and I'm like, man, between the flatbread trailer on Brinkley Street, we're set. So no, Serenity Intake is on Binkley Street in Soldotna. You can call as well, or you can look online for Serenity House, Serenity Intake. So thank you so much, Lauren, for all of your story, and we look forward to watching more of your progression and hearing more stories as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is You and I for the Kenai.